The Masons' battle with cancer nearly 10 years earlier had been excruciating and devastated them financially. So when Valerie began to experience physically debilitating symptoms, her parents were terrified that their worst nightmare may soon be starting over.
We had to go back to our family physician because he had to schedule my MRI. And that was the first and only time he looked at me. He's like, all right, so put on a gown, and he does, and he looks at my back. And by this time, you could actually see that there was a bit of a lump there. And he's looking at it, he's like, oh my God, look at that. And he's like, oh, we're scheduling this right away. I'm like, you couldn't have done that a year and a half ago when I wasn't in pain?
We were in this big room. She's off there getting her MRI. And I can see the technician at the other end of this big room, and we're sitting in these chairs. And I'm looking at the screen. And normally I wouldn't know what I was looking at, but I'm looking at the screen from like 50 feet away. It doesn't look right.
The doctors at Children's Medical City, Dallas Children's Hospital here, came and sat down and wanted to explain in his professional manner that it was Ewing sarcoma cancer. And it's quite extensive. And then they had a surgeon they brought in that told us that because of the size, the mass, that he couldn't even do surgery.
Valerie was suffering from a vicious cancer called a Ewing sarcoma. It's a rare type of sarcoma that usually begins in the bones, but rapidly spreads to lungs especially, but can go to brain and liver and just about anywhere else it can manage to go to. And oftentimes the metastases are random.
It's kind of like that book Gilda Radner wrote. It said, it's always something. And that's what was running through my mind. It's like, it's always something. What's next? You know, it's kind of like, what's next?
We were sitting with Valerie in her room, and he came in again, and they had taken more tests. I remember it wasn't the next day, it could have been 2 days. They took some tests, and the test came back. And he says, I have some more bad news for you, and he didn't give you time to stop him. He just blurted out that her cancer has metastasized to both her lungs, and it's a lot more serious than we originally thought.
I just totally flipped out. I started crying, and I was just very angry. And my mom was like holding me, and she's like, it's gonna be okay. And I was just like, I was like, why? Why? It's just, my whole question was why? How could this happen? It just didn't make any sense. And what angered me is their negligence. Hello, they could have prevented this a long way behind, back before it got this far gone.
For a year, nobody bothered to just simply take a picture. What would it have took? An x-ray, some exam, a picture of that area.
It had been going on for so long. It had eaten into her pelvic bone quite a bit. Swiss cheese.
In Ewing sarcoma, the protocol is a very lengthy protocol. It often involves intensive chemotherapy for as much as a year or more. And by this I mean treatments weekly to every 3 weeks, getting IVs during this time, being constantly at risk and with infection and bleeding, hair loss, nausea and vomiting.
Her first round of chemo left her so depleted. She needed a transfusion, high fever, really looked bad.
Valerie, this cute girl, all bubbly, healthy, running around in trips, and suddenly a couple weeks later you see her without hair, weak, in bed, very sick with the chemotherapy. She lost a lot of weight, and it's very hard for the teenagers. It really hit a lot of the kids in the community. A lot of kids were very touched. They started going to the hospital, some started praying.
I was sad and I was worried for her, and I was angry because I just felt like it wasn't fair for someone who has so much time left to live to have something like this happen.
It makes it a lot harder to concentrate on your life when you're worried about somebody that you really care about and you really love.
She would look fine in the morning, and then in the afternoon we get home, she'd be like pale and she wouldn't feel good.
After my first round of traditional treatment, which was 5 days of intense chemotherapy, I actually went home and I had a fever of 102 degrees.
I brought her home, and I heard this noise, some thump from upstairs.
I passed out upstairs on the floor. I couldn't walk. My dad heard me collapse, and he freaked out, and he ran up there and rushed me to the hospital.
Valerie's chemotherapy had destroyed so many white blood cells that she needed a blood transfusion immediately. Her struggle with cancer had reached a new low.
She was white as a ghost. She was crying, and she said, she was begging me to not do this anymore, to stop them, to not allow them to do this anymore. And I looked at her, and I said, I promise you, no one will hurt you like this again.